Hey everyone, welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're diving right into an absolute masterclass. If you're gearing up for the CELPIP exam, you probably already know that the reading and listening sections rely heavily on local Canadian news, specifically CBC News. To actually conquer this test, well, you don't just need good English. You really need to understand the cultural and political logic behind Canadian news stories. So get ready, because we're about to break down a top-tier lesson plan to make sure you master this material with complete and total confidence. Okay, let's dive right into this resource. What we're working with today is a highly distilled, concentrated lesson plan from a gold medal CELPIP coach, designed specifically to leave absolutely zero omissions in your test prep. Because of the strict time limits on the exam, understanding the dense underlying structure of these texts is, quite literally, everything. This is essentially a master map of the three most tested CBC News themes: the housing crisis, environmental protection, and labor disputes. Today, we're going to extract the absolute core of that strategy. So here is our masterclass roadmap for today. 1. Decoding CBC News logic. 2. The housing crisis theme. 3. Exam traps and strategies. And 4. Step-by-step execution. All right, Section 1. Decoding CBC News logic. If you want to ace the CELPIP, you've really got to grasp this highly specific Canadian characteristic that runs through almost all of their news reporting. There are three foundational pillars you simply must recognize. First up is multi-level government dynamics. The constant friction and shifting of responsibility between federal, provincial, and municipal governments is a perpetual testing point. Second is balanced perspectives. Canadian news almost always presents opposing voices. Think environmental groups versus energy companies, or unions versus management. Finally, intense paraphrasing. The exam questions will never, ever use the exact words from the original text. They will always use advanced synonyms. Moving on to Section 2, the housing crisis theme. So now that we've got the macro logic down, let's introduce one of the most frequently tested microcontexts on the exam: the Canadian housing crisis and the resulting policy changes. Let's look at a simulated reading Part 3 scenario. The text reads, the federal government has pledged $4 billion to incentivize municipalities to build more homes faster. However, to access the funds, cities must reform their archaic zoning bylaws, specifically allowing high-density housing in traditionally single-family neighborhoods. Several mayors argue this bypasses local jurisdiction and ignores current infrastructure deficits. Just notice the instant tension there between the federal funding offer and that fierce municipal pushback. Now, to actually navigate a passage like that, you need a rock-solid vocabulary foundation. These essential keywords appear across all housing-related test questions. We've got housing affordability, which is the core issue; incentivize, meaning to stimulate or encourage action; high-density housing, clashing directly with single-family neighborhoods; and infrastructure, referring to the essential facilities a city needs to function, which, mayors often argue are already stretched way too thin. And this whole situation brilliantly illustrates the exact multi-level government dynamic we talked about earlier. You have the federal government on one side and the municipality or local city government on the other. I literally cannot stress this enough. Confusing these two levels of government is one of the most common reasons students lose points. The test designers will actively try to trick you into mixing up who is offering the money and who is resisting the rules. Let's deep dive into two incredibly high-frequency Canadian cultural terms that honestly cause a lot of headaches: jurisdiction and zoning bylaws. Jurisdiction is simply the scope of authority. Basically, who has the legal right to make decisions. Zoning bylaws are the specific local land use laws controlled by municipalities. The central conflict in these passages is almost always local jurisdictions fiercely resisting federal overreach, especially when their archaic or outdated zoning laws are being challenged by higher authorities. Okay, Section 3, exam traps and strategies. Now that we have the vocabulary and the cultural context locked in, it is time to shift to application. We have to map out the exact testing points. You see, the exam is testing your ability to attribute responsibility: who is paying, who is setting conditions, and who is executing. It also tests if you actually understand the core reasons for opposition. Why don't the mayors want the money? We're going to unpack exactly how to navigate this. So, the crucial point here is understanding how the exam manipulates the text to create false answers. Take a look at these three major traps. First, identity confusion. An incorrect option might state the municipal government is funding the project, deliberately swapping federal for municipal. Second, absolute terms. If the text says several mayors argue, a trap option is going to say all local governments rejected the fund. Never fall for broad generalizations. Third, the tense or timeline trap. The text says the government pledged to incentivize, but a trap option will falsely claim they have successfully resolved the crisis. This brings us to our actual scoring strategies. You need actionable tactics in the exam room. Tactic 1. The second you see words like federal, provincial, or municipal, highlight or mark them immediately. You must know exactly who is regulating whom. Tactic 2. Scan for attitude and emotion words like pushback, argue, or ignore. These words are like flares, lighting up the true perspectives of the different parties. Finally, Section 4, Step-by-Step Execution. We are going to put all the theory, vocabulary, and strategy into practice right now with a simulated question breakdown. Here is your test question. Which paragraph mentions the conditions local governments must meet to receive financial support? I want you to keep the traps and that intense paraphrasing we just learned in mind as we solve this. The test is definitely not going to use these exact words in the passage. To definitively solve this problem, we're going to use a highly structured 4-step answering process. This method ensures you aren't just guessing based on a gut feeling, but you are actually verifying the information logically. Here is the ultimate step-by-step walkthrough. Step 1, logical breakdown. The question asks for conditions they must meet. Logically, we're looking for a prerequisite. Step 2, scanning. We scan the text for requirement words, and boom, we find the phrase, however, to access the funds, cities must reform their archaic zoning bylaws. Step 3, information verification. This is where we match up the intense paraphrasing. Conditions equals reform zoning bylaws. Local governments equals municipalities or cities. And receive financial support perfectly equals access the funds. Step 4, conclusion. Since all elements match perfectly via synonyms, we can safely select the paragraph containing that sentence as our correct answer. And just like that, you successfully decoded the underlying logic of CBC News passages. You've navigated the complex multi-level government disputes of the housing crisis, and you've seen exactly how to dismantle exam questions step by step. But as we wrap up today, I want to leave you with a bit of a challenge. You've mastered this framework for housing, right? But how will you spot that dangerous absolute terms trap when you face your next passage on, say, environmental policy or carbon taxes? The themes will change, but the logic and the traps remain exactly the same. Take this system, apply it to every practice test you take, and you will be unstoppable. Keep learning, stay focused, and I'll catch you in the next explainer.